Bale, not the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the Prime Minister for advance sight of his statement? We are proud to stand shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine, and our support remains unwavering. Ukraine is battling the most flagrant breach of territorial integrity in Europe in recent times. We must never forget that this war was started by Putin, who is trying to extinguish a democracy on our own continent. It is important that we stand together to defend the principle that aggressors should not succeed. The previous Conservative government led Europe in support for Ukraine. We were the first country to provide modern Western main battle tanks and to gift munitions and Storm Shadow missiles. We led the way on sanctions and trained tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers on UK soil. It is now incumbent on this government to leverage British influence at this crucial time for the West. Putin's relentless bombardment of Kyiv and KGB-style negotiating tactics show he is not serious about peace, which is why Russia must not be welcomed back into the international fold without a comprehensive peace agreement. So will the Prime Minister rule out support for readmitting Russia to the G7? We all want this terrible war to end. And as the Prime Minister rightly said, elements of that draft 28-point plan were unacceptable. Conservatives are clear that the blanket surrender of Ukrainian territory would mean rewarding Putin's unprovoked aggression. What is the government's position on reports that Ukraine's territorial integrity is on the table? Because if Putin is seen to emerge stronger from these negotiations, all our potential adversaries will be emboldened. Be in no doubt, Mr. Speaker, the axis of authoritarian states is collaborating to destabilize the West, aided by China, with Iran providing weapons and North Korea providing troops for Putin. It is precisely for these reasons that the government must continue to work extremely closely with the US and to understand their objectives. Parties like the Lib Dems and the Greens, who are encouraging us to decouple from the US, are putting their anti-American prejudice above national security. But, Mr. Speaker, given that in the last fortnight, the Royal Navy has intercepted 2 Russian ships in our waters, and with Russian spy ships pointing lasers at RAF pilots, it is a disgrace that Reform are still blaming NATO for Russia's aggression. Although perhaps it should come as no surprise when their former leader in Wales was sent to prison last week for taking bribes from Putin. Earlier this year, Mr. Speaker, many countries came together to form the Coalition of the Willing, pledging to strengthen support for Ukraine. Can the Prime Minister update us on the planning and readiness of the Coalition of the Willing? What is its scope and terms of mission? And what can the Prime Minister tell us about a counter-proposal that is reportedly being submitted by the EU? Mr. Speaker, to stand with Ukraine, we need to know we can also stand on our own 2 feet. Last week, the Commons Defence Select Committee warned that Britain is unprepared for a major attack and the government is making glacial progress towards conflict readiness. So it is concerning that reports indicate the MOD faces a potential budget cut this financial year of £2.6 billion. Can the Prime Minister confirm whether this is true or false? Meanwhile, the EU is reportedly demanding nearly €7 billion for the UK to buy into its defence fund. Conservatives warned that this would happen. At the time the UK-EU reset deal was being negotiated, the Shadow Defence Secretary said that Labour had given away 12 years of British fishing rights in exchange for nothing. He was right. Will the Prime Minister rule out paying the EU for access to SAFE? Mr. Speaker, it is extremely disappointing that Europe is still buying Russian oil and gas. Moscow should be denied safe harbours for its tankers and profits, and Europe should ban Russian oil and gas sooner than its current 2027 deadline. I believe the Prime Minister agrees with that sentiment. So what pressure will he put on European countries to stop them buying Russian oil and gas? Mr. Speaker, the UK's genuinely world-leading support has made a material difference to Ukraine's ability to fight back against Russia's illegal invasion. support that I will remind the Prime Minister began under the Conservatives. Let's not forget that in 2022, Russia thought it could capture Kyiv and subjugate Ukraine within days. So let's wake up and face that threat from Russia. So finally, can the Prime Minister reassure the House that we will be boosting our own defence capabilities as well as using our influence to ensure that secure future for Ukraine?
Minister.
Well, can I start by thanking her support on Ukraine? I think it is really important that we stay united in this House. And can I readily acknowledge the role of the previous government in leading on Ukraine and, in fact, in bringing the whole House together on this issue, which it did for a number of years and allowed us a platform on which to build the support that we are now putting in place. In relation to membership of the G7, G8, the focus at the moment is on a ceasefire, so anything along those lines is a long way off. But, we have to remember that Putin is the aggressor here. He is the one who started this war. On territorial integrity, the sovereignty of Ukraine is paramount, and that's why any questions about the future of Ukraine must be determined by Ukraine. And that is why I've been speaking frequently to both President Trump and President Zelensky. President Zelensky probably 5 or 6 times in the last 2 or 3 days on a whole range of issues. Can I join her in her comments about reform, because it is shocking that a senior official, the leader in Wales, has been jailed for over 10 years, a very significant sentence, for pro-Russia bribes. That is extraordinary. And that is why I say, and I say again, there should be, that the reform leadership should have the courage to launch an investigation. How on earth did that happen in their party? And what other links are there? But today, and this statement, and the question across the House will reinforce once again that reform with their pro-Putin approach would have absolutely no role in bringing allies together on important issues across the globe. Mr. Speaker, she asks about the coalition of the willing. 9 months ago, President Macron and I brought the coalition of the willing together. There are now 36 like-minded countries that meet and discuss frequently and align our positions and our support. That is a considerable achievement, and we have plans in relation to security guarantees, in relation to air, sea and land. Mr. Speaker, on the text of the agreement that's being worked on in Geneva, there was an intensive discussion about this, as she would have expected at the G20, involving a number of key allies, both the E3 plus key coalition of willing allies, and the strong consensus was that we should work with the text that's in existence, unacceptable though some parts of it are, because other parts are essential, rather than a different text, and that is the process that's going on in Geneva, and I think that's the right approach. On defence spending, I've made my position clear, and it goes with the strategic review of defence as well as to how we take that forward. The safe negotiations are going on with the EU in the usual way, and one of the commitments I made in relation to our reset with the EU was that we would do it by quiet diplomacy rather than shouting from megaphones across the channel. On oil and gas, she asks, and this is really important, we are taking every opportunity to have extensive discussions to take Russian oil and gas off the market. This has to be done across Europe. It has to be done beyond Europe. There are discussions I've had beyond Europe on this issue. It is vital that we press ahead, and we are doing so and taking every opportunity. But can I return to where I started? I do genuinely think it's important in this House that we're united on Ukraine. The only winner, if we divide on party political grounds, will be Putin. And I again recognise the work and the lead that the previous government took, which I was proud to support in opposition. I'm proud to take that forward as Prime Minister. I'm grateful for the support that we're getting from the opposition.
Chair of the Select Committee, Dame Emily Thornberry.
Mr. Speaker, can I begin by complimenting the Prime Minister on his work on the international stage? But I ask him, is he aware that yesterday a statement was put out by the 22 chairs of the Foreign Affairs Committees from parliaments from across the whole of Europe, and we made it clear that we are united in the belief that Ukraine's sovereignty is not just vitally important for brave Ukrainians, but it is vital for the continued security of Europe too. And so we are very pleased to hear from the Prime Minister when he assures the House that any plan that is to be agreed will be nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine, but can he also assure the House there will be nothing about Europe without Europe?
Well, can I thank her for her question, but also reassure her I did see that letter that was put out yesterday. And she's absolutely right that this conflict affects Ukraine and Ukraine's sovereignty, but it also affects the whole of Europe, including the United Kingdom, both in our values and our security, and materially in relation to things like the cost of living and the price of energy. Nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine, nothing about Europe without Europe, nothing about NATO without NATO are key principles that sit behind the work that we're doing.
Daisy Cooper, Deputy Leader of the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and may I thank the Prime Minister for an advance view of his statement. If this is the endgame for Putin's illegal and murderous war, then we have one chance to get it right. One chance to safeguard the future of Ukraine and one chance to safeguard the future of Europe. The stakes could not be higher. Many of us fear that President Trump is gearing up to betray the rights of Ukrainians. Ukrainians who have fought valiantly in the face of war crimes, torture, and the abduction of thousands of children. The White House has tried to deny that Trump's original 28-point plan was a Russian wish list, but that is precisely what it was. We Liberal Democrats welcome the statement from the Prime Minister that Ukraine's sovereignty must be maintained. So when the Prime Minister speaks with the Coalition of Willing this afternoon, will he relay that all major parties in this House agree with him in unequivocally ruling out any proposals that limit Ukraine's sovereignty to defend itself now or in the future must be ruled out, including its right to join defence alliances like NATO? Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister also offer his support and that of the Coalition of Willing to join President Zelensky for any future negotiations with President Trump, so President Zelensky doesn't have to suffer the indignity of being bullied by Trump on his own once again, and so that Europe can show a strong and united stand? Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is absolutely right to request that Reform UK conducts an investigation into pro-Russian bribes. Can I ask the Prime Minister whether he will also then commission a second Russia report into Russian interference in our democracy? My honourable friend for Bicester and Woodstock has brought forward a bill enabling the unilateral seizure of Russian state assets in the UK. Can the Prime Minister confirm whether in his discussions with G20 partners he has secured any progress on plans to seize those frozen Russian assets, and if not, why not? Mr. Speaker, on Sudan, will the Prime Minister use his role as the penholder for Sudan to take the lead at the United Nations to secure and enforce a countrywide arms embargo? And finally, the Prime Minister did not mention China, despite reports that the Prime Minister met with the Chinese Premier at the G20. The apparent imminent approval of Chinese super embassy would be a moment of shame for this government. So will the Prime Minister block this application and summon the Chinese ambassador to make clear that we will not accept Beijing's efforts to spy on our parliament, nor will we accept their efforts to intimidate and harass Hong Kongers in our communities?
Well, can I start by thanking her for her support in relation to Ukraine support, which is important, and certainly I'll make a point this afternoon at the Coalition of Willing of expressing how united this House is in relation to the key principles. In relation to her point about President Zelensky, we are, I think, the closest ally of Ukraine in terms of respected and trusted, and that is why not only have I spoken intensively and extensively to President Zelensky over many months and years, but in particular over the last few days, a number of times, sometimes a day, including this morning, in order to do what we can to guide this into the right place. In relation to reform, I completely agree with her comments. It is extraordinary that in this chamber we're having a debate about a war which Russia has perpetrated on Ukraine, and a senior member of Reform is convicted of pro-Russian bribes. In relation to interference with democracy, it is of deep concern. On the assets, look, we are having extensive discussions about this, including at the G20 and elsewhere, in relation to what more can be done, and making progress. It's not straightforward, as she will know, but it is the subject of very extensive discussions to see what more we can do. And in relation to, well, firstly, the Chinese Premier, let me just be clear. I said hello and shook the hand of the Chinese Premier at the G20. We're in the Leaders' Lounge together, and it would have been a little bizarre and discourteous not to have done so, but we didn't actually engage in any substantive discussion. She raises the question of the embassy. That's obviously a quasi-judicial decision that will be taken in accordance with those processes.
Tamanjit Singh Desi, Chair of the Select Committee.
Thank you very much. I welcome the Prime Minister's update statement to the House, but Mr. Speaker, let's be under no illusion. President Trump's originally proposed peace plan is humiliating and unpalatable to the Ukrainians, would actually be detrimental to our own European security, and would reward the invading, annexing aggressor. And that's why yesterday the cross-party House of Commons Defence Committee issued a very robust statement calling on the government to urgently give full moral, practical and support in whatever way that it could, especially diplomatically, to our Ukrainian friends. But would the Prime Minister agree that at this critical juncture it is imperative that the UK, along with its European allies, shows clear and determined leadership, is actually around the table to negotiate, so that we can be a voice for our Ukrainian friends, because if we're not at the table, we'll be on the menu.
Prime Minister.
Well, can I thank him for his questions? In relation to the original plan, clearly there were elements which were unacceptable, and that's why I'm pleased that progress has now been made in relation to it. I can assure him we're giving support to President Zelensky and Ukraine at every level, and extensively, as he would expect. And he's quite right that part of the reason that we're able to have influence with our allies is because we are present at the international table in a way that we haven't been over recent years.
Father House, Edward Lee.
The Prime Minister's done a pretty good job of getting close to President Trump. Can he convince him that to reward the tyrant bear with land he's already taken is bad enough, but it would be utterly egregious and appalling to allow him, the bear, the ruthless bear, to take land he hasn't even taken yet in Fortress Donbass? And it would make Ukraine utterly defenseless, just as we allowed Czechoslovakia to be utterly defenseless when we forced them to give up the Sudeten land 85 years ago.
Well, look, can I agree with him in terms of the very idea of negotiating land which hasn't been taken in nearly 4 years of a conflict and has cost tens of thousands of lives is so obviously unacceptable that it shouldn't be put forward or seen as a serious proposition, and I agree with him wholeheartedly on that.
Alex Sobel.
Mr. Speaker, I thank once more the Prime Minister for his untinting support for Ukraine, and that nothing can be done for Ukraine without Ukraine. In the last few moments, media sourced in the US have reported that Ukraine has agreed to the peace proposal brokered by the Trump administration. I know the Prime Minister will not have the detail of that, but if this is the case, I know we're in a statement now, will he come back and give the House the full details of what has been agreed by Ukraine, US and potentially Russia?
Yes, of course I will. From my discussions with President Zelensky this morning, I'll need to look precisely at that, but I suspect it won't be the whole of the agreement that needs to be reached, because obviously the discussions so far have been predominantly Ukraine-US. Obviously, there are European elements that are important, NATO elements that are important, that need further discussions, and of course, none of this has been back to the Russian side yet. So I'll have a look at the report and look behind the headline. If there is anything material to report, I'll of course do it. My own sense is that it'll probably be progress on the Geneva exercise rather than the agreement of all elements.
Sir John Whitting.
If it is the case that Ukraine has agreed to a proposal which has been brokered by the United States, would the Prime Minister agree that if it is acceptable to Ukraine, then it must be made acceptable to Russia, and that we need to exert every possible pressure on Russia through increased military support, sanctions, and use of frozen assets in order to make them accept a ceasefire?
Well, I certainly agree with that wholeheartedly, and we'll see what has been. I suspect it's the version that emerged from Geneva yesterday that may be being talked about. But of course the next step is Russia, and we need to exert every pressure, whether that's capability, whether it's in relation to the assets, or whether it's oil and gas, which we've been bearing down for a considerable period of time.
Stella Crease. Absolutely, it's just not the rules of the House, and somebody who's got more establishment in here. Straight after, by all means, if it's related to this, but please, we have the rules of the House. The rules of the House come first.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think we all understand this is a breaking situation. Can I ask the Prime Minister, because in such an uncertain world we know that allyship is integral to our own security, and that post-war generation created both the NHS and NATO because they understood the power of collective solidarity. I'm very pleased to hear him talk about the importance, therefore, of the safe negotiations, because our work with Europe isn't about replacing our relationships with NATO, but strengthening them. Could he confirm that he raised the safe negotiations with the President of the European Commission? Because this situation also reminds us that we have to get the European defence industry into a shape where it can face the threats we face from countries like Russia, and the UK must be part of those conversations too.
I can assure her that negotiations are going on in the ordinary way in relation to SAFE and a number of other issues. Mr. Speaker, what I'm endeavouring to do is just to get the best information I can in relation to what is developing, and I'll weave it into an answer if I get anything that will help the House. I'll certainly come back, but if I'm able to update the House as we go along, I'll endeavour to do so that others can then ask questions about that.
Phil Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the Prime Minister's commitment to ensuring that decisions about Ukraine will not be taken without Ukraine and to upholding Ukraine's sovereignty. Yet we know that Russia is trying to use this negotiation to undermine not only Ukraine's but Europe's future security. So in light of the negotiations ongoing, will the Prime Minister confirm that any future deal will reject Russia's references to, and I quote, ambiguities over the last 30 years, which is code for unravelling NATO back to 1997, and reject attempts to determine which nations may join NATO or where NATO may put its military assets?
Can I thank him for that, because we must always remember this is about Europe as well as being about Ukraine, and Putin's ambitions are not limited to Ukraine, as the bordering countries are intensely aware, and therefore it is important that we see this for what it is and act accordingly as European allies.
Joanna Baxter.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate this is a developing situation, but we do know that at least 19,546 children from Ukraine have been stolen by Russia, sent to over 400 locations across 8 time zones. We know that 1.6 million children in the occupied territories are being subject to militarisation and indoctrination. We know that 200 military training camps turn Ukrainian children into Russian soldiers, and we know that 1 in 10 of the children who have been rescued from Russia have reported that they've been sexually abused. So, can the Prime Minister remind President Trump that behind every one of those figures is a child? And can he assure the House that any peace plan that's agreed will deliver the safe return of all the Ukrainian children who have been stolen? And that Russia will be held to account for the war crimes that they continue to commit?
Can I thank her for her campaigning and all of her efforts to keep a constant light on this appalling situation. It is shocking that Russia is treating these children as a weapon of war, kidnapping and subjecting them to all sorts of abuse and ill treatment. And we are doing and must do everything we can to safeguard these children and to get them back to their families where they belong.
Sir Julian.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I ask the Prime Minister to focus on the question of effective security guarantees? Security guarantees only deter aggression if there is no doubt that the guarantor will act in accordance with the guarantee he has given. And therefore, if there is a security guarantee to unoccupied Ukraine, it is absolutely essential that the guarantor has some forces on the ground, because otherwise a guarantee to an unoccupied region that is a strategic vacuum can lead to a wider war by miscalculation by the killer in the Kremlin.
Well, can I thank him for his question? That's why we've done so much work with the Coalition of the Willing in relation to the capability and the planning for land, air and sea, with detailed plans now, which they're as advanced as they can be until we know what the next stage of the proceedings are. It's also why we and I have worked so hard with the US to get a US security guarantee going alongside the Coalition of the Willing, so that the two go together. And he'll have seen that that is part of the discussion in Geneva, on which we've managed to make some progress.
Fleur Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I join many others here today in welcoming the recent progress on the war in Ukraine and at the G20 in Geneva, and most recently. Putin is continuing to circumvent sanctions by other countries. Will the Coalition of the Willing work with those other countries, as the Prime Minister has explained will happen, to ensure that the money is cut off that's continuing to fuel the war and will enable a just and lasting peace and rebuilding of Ukraine?
Well, I thank her for her question. This question of sanctions is absolutely vital, and bearing down on any individuals trying to circumvent those sanctions, and that's why we put in place the sanctions and the measures behind the sanctions, and we work with allies to make them enforceable.
Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, I think it's important to begin by stating that those on the far right who parrot the views of Putin and those on the far left who seek to undermine NATO are no friends of Ukraine. Now, I was pleased in the Prime Minister's statement to hear the unequivocal approach he's taken to responsibility in this regard, and rightly pinning it on one person, Vladimir Putin. He did, however, equivocate in relation to his response to the Leader of the Opposition with regards to the G8. Now, Katja Kallas from the European Union was very clear in her comments this morning that Russia cannot be in the G8. She said definitely not. Surely he agrees with that.
Well, look, I mean, Russia's the aggressor here, and obviously these are questions for the G7 to determine, but I can tell him the focus is very much on the process at the moment, which is getting the ceasefire and getting an end to this conflict. Can I join him in his question, in the point he makes about those on the left? Because the Green Party, of course, says we should pull out of NATO at a moment like this. They also say, by the way, that they would make renting a property landlords unlawful, but selling drugs lawful. I have to say, I find that a little odd, outside the school gate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week in Rochdale, I joined our proud Ukrainian community to mark the Holodomor, which was Stalin's forced famine of millions of Ukrainians in the 1930s. There's a modern-day Holodomor been going on in Ukraine thanks to the drone strikes and airstrikes of Putin's regime. So does he share my disgust, absolute disgust, at the treacherous actions of the former leader of reform in Wales, who had lined his own pockets with cash from the Russian regime? And does he agree that Reform UK's refusal to carry out a full investigation just proves they really are Putin's poodles?
Well, can I agree with him? This is clearly a really serious case. If any other party would want to investigate to assure itself that how did this happen? This is not a minor transgression. This is something that's now been visited with a 10-year sentence because it undermines our country. Surely the Reform leadership would want to know how did that happen on their watch? And also, what other links are there between their party and Russia? No wonder they're Putin friendly. How on earth could they respond to a situation like this? There's no point standing up and saying you support Ukraine if within your own party you are pro-Russian.
Sandra Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister's role in marshalling European cooperation is essential and very welcome. Would it not be obscene and unconscionable for any country, indeed one that is one of the permanent five at the United Nations, that has invaded their neighbour, murdered its citizens, to get away with it, to profit from it, let alone rejoining the G7? Mr. Speaker, have we not seen this film before? Do we not know how it ends?
Yes. I'm grateful for him for raising this. That is why it is really important that we make the case for and ensure that it's a just and lasting peace, because we have seen this before. We've seen agreements brokered before without security guarantees, with the inevitable result that Putin will go again. And that's why, in relation to all of the principles I've been operating on, setting up the coalition of willing, and in all my discussions, it's got to be a just and lasting peace. It's got to be one that actually deters Putin from doing this again, because we know that without that deterrence, without those consequences, he has the ambition to go again, and he will go again, and we must guard against that.
Uma Kumaran.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister for his steadfast leadership on Ukraine? My constituent, Roxolana, is one of the tens of thousands of Ukrainian families with a loved one missing under special circumstance. Families who don't know if their loved ones are detained, a prisoner of war, or even alive. It's likely Russia has not notified the ICRC on the status of thousands more prisoners of war. Yeah. On behalf of Roskolana and of all the Ukrainian families I met this weekend at St Mary's Ukrainian School, can the Prime Minister assure this House that the UK will support every effort to ensure that Russia complies with international humanitarian law regarding the treatment and identification of prisoners of war who are their loved ones and their families?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I thank her for raising this and also for her work bearing down on this, in particular the meeting she had at the weekend. This is a really serious issue. We are raising it with our allies. It is further evidence of the total disregard that Russia has for any of the principles of war, even in an unjust war, and we will continue to bear down on it.
Gavin Robertson.
Mr. Speaker, over the last 18 months, the Prime Minister has shown himself to be influential and purposeful at significant times in this crisis. So I thank him for that. Mr. Speaker, whilst events may be superseding the statement this afternoon, there are some principles that should not change. Aggression must not be rewarded. Violence should not pay. There has always been an alternative to violence. But when the Prime Minister says rightly that there should be a just and a lasting peace, does he recognise that it may be difficult to sell a lasting peace to the people of Ukraine if so-called allies are forcing President Zelensky to accept an encroachment on his sovereign territory, and that those allies should be robustly defending Ukraine rather than allowing so-called friends to allow the loss of territory?
Well, can I thank him and give him my assurance that I'm acutely aware of the need for this to be a lasting peace for Ukrainians. That is a large part of my discussion with President Zelensky as to how we bring that about. But I'm extremely mindful of the fact this has to be just and lasting for the Ukrainians who didn't start this war, don't want this war, have suffered hugely under this war, and need to be reassured that if there is a peace, it is going to last, and they're not going to be subject to the same thing in just a few years' time.
Nia Griffith.
Indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, I very much commend my right honourable friend's efforts to engage our allies in support for Ukraine. And does he agree that resolve, unity and support from the West is absolutely vital to give Ukraine the guarantees that it needs for a lasting peace? And how optimistic is he, therefore, about the resolve and commitment that he will secure from the Coalition of the Willing later today?
Well, I'm grateful to I'm very confident about the assurance from the Coalition of Willing, because we've already agreed plans between the countries and the Coalition of Willing that are as advanced now as they can be until we know the next stage of the process. Obviously, what I want to ensure is that that is forged or welded together with US guarantees alongside of the Coalition of Willing, which will be then the strongest possible guarantees.
Richard Ford.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Prime Minister welcomed the inclusion in the 28-point peace plan of security guarantees. Point 10 of the proposed plan says if Russia invades Ukraine, it would lead to a decisive, coordinated military response. Who would coordinate that response, and what does the Prime Minister anticipate would be the UK's part in it?
I thank him for his question. Without going to the details, but the plans that the Coalition of Willing have drawn up are about capability and coordination and command structures, and therefore a huge amount of military work has gone into exactly how that would operate in practice. So these aren't simply countries saying, here's some capability that I'm prepared to put on the table, as it were. They're military plans capable of being put into effect when they're needed.
Joe Powell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister for all his efforts on ramping up the economic pressure on Putin, including oil and gas and the shadow fleet. On the $300+ billion of Russian sovereign banking assets in the West, we know there are a few holdouts in the European Union who don't want to mobilise this loan backed by those assets as a down payment on reparations. Could he update us on what progress has been made to get that over the line and get that money moving?
Well, I thank him, and a proposal has been put forward in relation to how the assets could possibly be used. Obviously, that does require a high level of agreement by various interested parties. That's why extensive discussions are going on as to how we can make that progress. But there's no pretending that it's simple and straightforward. It isn't, but that shouldn't stop us trying to make further progress.
Sir Roger Gale.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I understand that the order of the day when dealing with Mr. Trump is flattery. I'm afraid, Madam Deputy Speaker, that 42 years of experience in this House haven't yet qualified me for that level of sycophancy. The presentation of a Kremlin wish list by the White House as a peace plan is risible, something that the Prime Minister has indicated rather more elegantly than I am myself. Would the Prime Minister seriously consider, if necessarily unilaterally, ensuring that the legislation goes through so that the frozen Russian assets can be used to support the Ukrainian war effort?
On the assets, I do want to make progress. My strong view is that if we're to make progress, it's better that as many countries as possible act at the same time. And that's what we're trying to achieve. If we do that, obviously, we will take whatever steps are necessary. But at the moment, my focus is on those discussions to try to progress this discussion, which has been difficult and fraught with risk, but nonetheless there is a willingness, I think, to move forward on it. And then other discussions I had in the margins of the G20 were with countries outside of Europe to see whether they will act at the same time along with us if we get that far, because I do think it's important to do so.
Alex Barris-Curtis.
Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm very proud to represent Cardiff West in this place. Nathan Gill, the former leader of Reform UK in Wales, was elected to serve the people of Wales in the European Parliament, but as we now know, he served not only himself but the interests of Russia, having admitted not one, not two, but 8 counts of bribery, and is now serving 10.5 years in imprisonment. So I know the Prime Minister will join me in condemning this treachery, but will he also join me in demanding that the leadership of Reform UK, who unfortunately typically can't be present here today, launch that independent investigation into this act of treason?
Well, he puts the point very powerfully, and it must be uncomfortable to hear this for the Reform Party. This is completely undermining our national security. It can't be right for a political party represented in this House to simply close their eyes and ears to this. There has to be an investigation. There has to be a level of reassurance that there aren't other links to Russia within the Reform Party and how this came about in the first place. And so his question is very good. It should be deeply uncomfortable for Reform MPs to be sitting in this House, hearing this, knowing they're sitting on their hands and doing absolutely nothing about it.
Richard Tice.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I remind the House that last year I personally donated a 5-figure sum, bought a pickup truck, filled it with first aid supplies, and drove it with other friends and colleagues to Ukraine and donated it to the brave soldiers of Ukraine. So my support and Reform support for Ukraine has been rock solid, Prime Minister, throughout. And it is important that this House is united, which it is, Madam Deputy Speaker. And last week, when the 28-point plan emerged, we rejected it immediately. Just yesterday, Prime Minister, I was with a Ukrainian delegation and we were talking specifically about the leverage that the European nations has with regard to the frozen assets, the majority of which, of course, are here in Europe. So would I urge the Prime Minister, amongst all of the noise, to utilise that leverage, because that, I think, is one of the most powerful negotiating points that the West has against the vile dictator Putin.
Well, Mr. Speaker, he could have stood up and said that Reform's seen sense and decided they will have an investigation in relation to what happened in this bribery case. And I don't doubt that he drove and personally committed in relation to support. But the simple fact is this: you can't be pro-Putin and pro-Ukraine. You have to decide between the two, and Reform is pro-Putin, and that is why they undermine. Well, they've just been convicted, a 10-year sentence for bribe, for what? Taking pro-Russian bribes. It couldn't be clearer than that. And an unwillingness to say we need to investigate how on earth that happened. Can he not see the inconsistency in what he's saying?
Rachel Maskell, and then I'll be calling Steve Darling.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is feared that the brutality in El Fasher will only intensify and also spread to Tooele and beyond if international action isn't convened and focused on the resolutions that are needed, not least to stop the incursions with drones supplied via the UAE and mercenaries as well. Could the Prime Minister say more about what happened in South Africa to put that focus which is necessary and what the next steps are to stop the expansion of the atrocities we're witnessing in Sudan?
Can I thank you for raising Sudan, because what was an appalling situation is even more appalling over recent days and weeks, and we discussed it pretty extensively in the G20 and support the work that the Quad is doing in relation to this, and that is aimed predominantly at a ceasefire and the provision of humanitarian aid. This is the worst humanitarian situation in the world, and bringing about a better resolution. Madam Deputy Speaker, can I just do my best to update the House in relation to the news. As I understand it, and this is coming to me secondhand, so I'm not, if this turns out to be not entirely accurate, I hope the House will forgive me. I'll come back and correct the record. But my understanding is this is not a new agreement. It is Ukraine confirming they're happy with the draft that emerged in Geneva yesterday, which of course doesn't cover the question of territory. So my best understanding is this is a confirmation of basically what came out of Geneva, that it isn't a new set of proposals or agreements in any way. So I think that's what it is. If I get more information, I'll update the House and we can discuss it in due course.
Steve Darling.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister talks of having extensive discussions about limiting the export of oil and gas from Russia. This is the engine that is driving the machine of the war effort from Russia. The Danish waters could offer the key to killing the shadow fleet. With an international convention regulating the shipping going through those straits, that would stop the shadow fleet and stop a significant part of this shadow fleet activity supporting Russia. It would also drive environmental support for this area with the stronger regulations with this convention. What consideration has the Prime Minister and his colleagues given to this?
Can I thank him for raising this, because how we deal with the shadow fleet is something we discuss regularly, and Danish authorities can do a lot and do a lot in their waters, as do Norway and other countries in the region, and we are looking at what further we could do in relation to the shadow fleet, because his underlying point is hugely important, which is the oil and gas are fueling Russia's aggression here, and that's why we need to ensure that oil and gas is taken off the market. That can only happen if we deal, amongst other things, with the shadow fleet.
Graham Downey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Prime Minister for his continued support of Ukraine. Can I furthermore, going back to the announcement at the G20 regarding the £4 billion deal with Indonesia, can I thank the Prime Minister for his efforts in securing that maritime partnership programme for Babcock, which will benefit people in my constituency, securing hundreds of jobs. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that that is testament to the skills and experience of the workforce at Rosyth, and will he continue to do everything that he can to support shipbuilding in Scotland and at Rosyth in particular?
This is such an important point, because winning these deals, whether it's the Indonesia deal that we finally finished concluding whilst we're at the G20, or the Norway frigate deal as well, it is only possible for us as a country to conclude those deals where we have to compete against others in the world. The frigate deal was against France, Germany and the United States because of the quality of the workforce, their professionalism and commitment to delivering on time. And that is why after the Norway frigate deal, I went up to the Clyde to see the workforce, to say thank you to them for putting me in a position where we could secure that deal. And I'd be grateful if he passes that on to his constituents.
Sir Alex Shelbrooke.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, signals matter. Right now, Putin thinks he's getting his own way. So, regarding even the answers the Prime Minister has given about the G7, can I just ask the Prime Minister, as a point of principle, would he sit around a table if the indicted war criminal Putin was sat at it?
No, I wouldn't. And I took my first opportunity at the United Nations Security Council when I was there last year, my first opportunity as Prime Minister, be very, very clear as to where I stand in relation to, in that case, the Security Council, but the principle applies elsewhere. You cannot be or subscribe to international law and the UN Charter if you're in breach of it by this illegal war.
Patricia Ferguson.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank my right honourable friend for the work he is doing to secure peace in Ukraine, and I also thank him for his very good comments about BAE Systems, which is partially located in my constituency of Glasgow West. Point 24 of the Trump plan indicates that one of the things that should happen as part of that plan is that all civilian detainees and hostages will be returned, including children. The kidnapping of children is such a heinous thing to do, and a war crime in and of itself, that surely as a mark of good faith, Putin shouldn't wait for any agreement on this plan or other plans, but should release those children immediately. And in saying that, I pay tribute to my honourable friend, the member for Paisley and Renfrew South, for the work she has done over many months on this issue. But would he also agree with me that point 26 of that plan, which says that all parties involved in this conflict will receive full amnesty for their actions during the war and agree not to make any claims or consider any complaints in the future, cannot be tolerated?
Well, can I agree with her on both fronts? Of course, these children should be released straight away. They should never have been taken in the first place, and it's heartbreaking as well as intolerable that they're held for a moment longer. And as for amnesty, no, I do not agree with amnesty for Putin and others for their illegal acts.
Dr. Ellie Chowns.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm deeply concerned that it appears that American negotiators have been listening more to the unreasonable demands of the Russian aggressors rather than to the security needs of the Ukrainians. Can the Prime Minister assure me that in his conversations with President Trump, he has made absolutely clear that the voices of Ukrainians have to be front and centre in securing any just and lasting peace?
I can assure her that in all my discussions, the principles I set out to the House, that matters on the future of Ukraine must be for Ukraine, have been the guiding principles in everything that we've done.
Olivia Blake.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Prime Minister for his statement and actions. If we do achieve peace, which we're all hoping we do, the efforts to rebuild Ukraine cannot just be about infrastructure. They have to also be focused on rebuilding people's lives, from those who have been devastatingly injured, those who've lost loved ones, and civil society, which has been really tested. What will the UK government do to make sure that there is the funding and support in place to allow not only the rebuilding of buildings, but the rebuilding of civil society?
I thank her for her question. She's right, it won't be just about rebuilding infrastructure, it will be about the rebuilding of society. And that's why I was really pleased last year to sign the 100-year agreement we had with Ukraine, which was intended to and does show that this isn't an agreement just for the duration of the conflict, but is something that goes well beyond the conflict to the lasting relationship that I hope we will have between our two countries.
David Mundell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I was very pleased that the Prime Minister also mentioned Sudan, and we can't be blind to Russia's malign interest there or indeed across the Sahel. But can I ask him specifically what discussions he had with Prime Minister Modi about his approach both to Russian oil, but also to what appear to be his overly friendly social media posts towards President Putin?
Well, I won't disclose all the details of my discussions, but he can rest assured that the principles that I've set out to the House guide me in all of those discussions.
Rupa Hook.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Prime Minister for his statement and updating us all while this is obviously a fast-moving situation. Last week at the OSCE, we harrowingly heard from our Ukrainian counterparts how 20,000 children have been abducted by Russia since this war began. So can I ask him again to reiterate that in the just and lasting peace that we all seek, that they are at the centre of all this, and to send a clear and immediate message, as Pink Floyd might have put it, hey, Putin, leave those kids alone.
Well, I agree with the principles she puts forward. I'm not sure I'll put it quite in the terms she does, but I think the sentiment is one that's shared. But I mean, you know, this is just shock. The idea of kidnapping children as an act of war and a weapon of war is just so disgusting, frankly, that we should do absolutely everything we can, not only to ensure that the children are safe and secure in return, but also that there's full accountability.
Matt Pritchard.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I thank the Prime Minister for his statement, but if I may just sort of, Madam Deputy Speaker, caution the Prime Minister. I understand that the reports that were referred to by the Honourable Member for Leeds North West or a single source US official unnamed. And I just think that we might be falling into a trap here that others want us to fall into, and that is bouncing the Ukrainians ahead of an arbitrary deadline of Thanksgiving Day. So I think we need to ensure that officials and all of us are able to verify sources and corroborate, even if they are reported in the mainstream media and repeated in the United Kingdom. So therefore, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm still allowed, I believe, to ask the question, what reassurance can the Prime Minister give the people of this country, and indeed Ukraine, that President Trump's very bad 28-point plan is not now replaced by a bad 19-point plan, because we all know from history that both Ukraine, Europe, the United Kingdom, and even our allies, the United States, will rue the day that we roll over for Putin. Because if we reward the aggressor, we know that history tells us they come back for more.
Can I thank him? And my instinct is with him on the breaking news. I spoke to President Zelensky about 4 hours ago, and I've obviously spoken to him extensively, so I've got a pretty good sense of where he's at on this. I'm intending to speak to him again this afternoon, but I think... I'm sorry? Well, my instinct is that this probably isn't anything of greater significance than what was coming out of yesterday. If it is, of course, I'll make another statement. But I spoke to him this morning and got a very clear sense of where he's at. I'm intending to speak to him again this afternoon. We've got the coalition of willing. If there is anything, I will, of course, update the House. But he's right to caution the underlying point he makes, which is that we must hold to the principle that matters about the future of Ukraine are for Ukraine. And that means we must be engaging as extensively as we are with the President and the Ukrainians to make sure that every step of the way we are taking into account in a practical sense that matters for Ukraine must be for Ukraine. That can only happen if we're talking to them in the way that we are.
Peter Swallow.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I refer members to my register of interest and thank the Prime Minister for the leadership he has shown on Ukraine. Madam Deputy Speaker, Year 6 students from St Margaret Clitheroe School in Bracknell have written to me to express their deep concern about the ongoing crisis we're seeing in Sudan. So can I thank the Prime Minister for his leadership at the G20 on this conflict and ask him what message he has for St Margaret Clitheroe students who are concerned about this deep tragedy.
Well, can he please pass the message back to them to say thank you for raising this. It is important that they've done so, and the fact that they raised it with him means it's been now raised through him on the floor of this House, so they're directly inputting into our democracy and accountability, and assure them that we are working with partners to bring about an end to the appalling situation in Sudan, the biggest humanitarian crisis in the world, and not just of recent days and weeks, but for a very long time, just simply worse and more intense, and that if we could reassure them we're doing everything we can with partners to bring an end to this awful situation, and thank them for their input.
Claire Young. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister referred to Putin's barbaric attacks on civilian energy infrastructure. What discussions has he had with his G20 counterparts about learning from Ukraine's experience to protect energy supplies and infrastructure from Russian hostile action?
Well, firstly, thank her for raising this, because the attacks on the energy supplies are intended to inflict damage on civilians in Ukraine, as it does on a regular basis, particularly as we go into the winter. We're doing two things. We're working with the Ukrainians on what more support we can give to them to safeguard their energy supplies, but of course with allies we're looking at where there are any issues that we need to address in relation to any vulnerabilities that we may have.
Laura Kirk-Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Prime Minister for his updates on the G20 and in particular for his commitment to the Global Fund, which I think we should be really proud of. I was also very pleased to see Sudan referenced in the joint declaration of the G20 leaders. As the Prime Minister has said, it's the world's worst humanitarian crisis, but we're also seeing appalling accounts of war crimes. So can I ask what more the Prime Minister will now do with global partners to secure a ceasefire, protect civilians and hold the warring parties to account for their crimes?
Well, can I thank her for a question? In particular, the Global Fund is so important. She heard the statistics that I went through. In relation to the wider situation, the focus is very much on a cessation of hostilities and humanitarian support, which is desperately needed.
Sir Bernard Jenkins.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does the Prime Minister agree with many assessments that make clear that Russia is actually in a far weaker position than President Putin pretends, so long as we continue to support the war effort in Ukraine? But that also depends upon us developing more independent, non-American capability, and the best way to do that is to fund the Ukrainians to develop their own capabilities so that they can continue to defend their own country.
Well, can I thank him for that, because it is important that we make clear that Russia is in a much weaker position than they pretend, and we should always remember that the early briefings and intelligence in relation to this conflict were that Russia would achieve its end in a matter of a few weeks at the very beginning of the war. Here we are nearly 4 years in, and because of the fearless defence of the Ukrainians, supported by others, that hasn't been the case. Secondly, in relation to the damage to their economy that sanctions and other financial issues are having, that has done real damage if you look at the inflation rate and the impact on their economy. But his central point is really important because the plans of the coalition of the willing are premised on Ukraine having the capability that it needs, around which the plans that we've put in place would operate, not as a substitute or as an alternative, but actually based on Ukraine having the ability and capability within Ukraine to do what it needs to do to safeguard and self-protect.
Catherine Atkinson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Trains, planes and submarines. The Prime Minister put the pride of Derby manufacturing front and centre of his G20. Millions saw him on a train made in Derby, halfway around the world in Johannesburg, showing the world what our city is famous for. Will he tell us more about what the deals he secured means for my constituents who work at Rolls-Royce and in the rail sector? And will he continue his focus on winning international deals for more high productivity, high skills, high wage jobs?
That she's an incredible champion for Derby, and it was really incredible to be in Johannesburg, sitting in a train that had been made in Derby, and it is very significant that countries around the world want to do deals with the United Kingdom because of the quality of our workforce, the professionalism and commitment of all those that work in Derby in her particular case, but in other workforces across the country. Those particular trains are going to be used for the run to the airport and back, and so they're going to be relied on very, very heavily in South Africa. But the idea, I was very proud that the other countries are saying it's the UK we now want to do deals with, as she says, whether that's in relation to frigates, whether it's in relation to submarines or trains, and she should be very proud of the workforce in Derby, and if she could pass on my thanks to them for allowing us to do this work, I'd be very grateful.
Anne Davies.
Madam Llefarydd, and thank you, Prime Minister, for your statement. It's reported in the draft deal notes that it is expected Russia will not invade its neighbours. It's not expected is wholly inadequate when we cannot place our trust in the words of leaders such as Vladimir Putin. What steps is the Prime Minister taking to ensure that this agreement includes clear, enforceable safeguards, and what measures are being implemented to strengthen the UK's resilience against Russian interference?
Can I thank her? Look, in relation to the security guarantees, the planning has taken place at the Coalition of the Willing. That needs to be put together with the US guarantee to make sure that it's not an expectation that Putin doesn't invade Ukraine again. It's an absolutely clear message that if he does again, there will be consequences, because it's only if that is in place with strong guarantees and credibility that we will be able to deter Putin, because without them, as we've seen from the past, he simply will breach any agreement that's reached in due course in the future. In relation to interference in our democracy, that we need to bear down on Russian interference in our democracy, and will continue to do so.
Arkeel Crichton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My friend, the Scottish journalist Jen Stout, has just returned from the grey zone between Russian and Ukrainian forces, where to try and evacuate the wounded or even wander outside for a moment is to invite death from the sky by drones. The message she brings back from Ukrainians on the front line is that they will not give up this territory that they have defended for years. And will the Prime Minister ensure that the message that comes from here, apart from the Lord Haw-Haws paid by Putin, is that their front line is our front line, and that Ukrainian sovereignty must be respected, and that we will stand with Ukraine?
Can I thank him? And he's absolutely right. The change in the use of drone warfare over the course of the last 3 to 4 years has been very accelerated, very intense, to the point now, as he really reflects, that if you're seen, you're dead. And that is the effect of drone warfare, and everybody on the front line absolutely understands that. Tens of thousands have been lives have been lost defending particular lines, in Donetsk in particular. And I will never forget visiting a hospital in Kyiv where I met those that had been burnt very badly on the front line and were receiving treatment in those hospitals, which was a very poignant reminder of the impact this is having on Ukrainians. And it is no wonder that they're not going to give that up after so much sacrifice.
Sir Desmond Swain.
What indication was there that Putin would accept even the earlier iteration of this agreement?
Very good question.
Well, I'm not able to say, because I've not been involved in any discussions with Putin as he would have expected. But I mean, the main thing is to be clear that the draft was not acceptable in a number of respects, but did have essential elements which are going to be required, which is why the work is being done to ensure that we get to a place that is acceptable to Ukraine, and then can be used as a basis, I hope, of some sort of negotiated outcome.
John Slinger.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I strongly welcome the Prime Minister's emphasis on a just and lasting peace. Does he agree that while it is noble to want the fighting to stop, in any conflict this can always be achieved by giving in to the aggressor's demands? And history shows that this is not peace, it is appeasement. Does he further agree that Ukraine must not be forced to give up its territory and long-term security needs, not only for their defence, but because this would weaken the very principles of sovereignty and the rules-based system, endangering us all?
Can I agree with the principles he set out and assure him that I'll make the point at the meeting of the coalition this afternoon that I always make when we meet, which is, whilst we are working for peace and trying to put in place security guarantees, we must not let up on keeping Ukraine in the fight now. It is a big mistake, and I do worry that because of the hope of peace, it is always possible that the focus goes off the fact that Ukraine needs support now to stay in the fight, and we must never lose that focus.
Robin Swan.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister's statement says that Putin continues to seek to undermine our security. So when a deal is done to the satisfaction of Ukraine, can the Prime Minister give this House an assurance that the defence and the preparations for our security against Putin, because he won't give up, will continue in regards to the work that we continue to do?
I can give him that reassurance, but I'll give him the reassurance that we won't wait until there's some agreement in place to ensure that. We're taking those measures now.
Jim Dixon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and on behalf of my constituents, can I congratulate the Prime Minister in demonstrating UK leadership by supporting the Ukrainian government and President Zelensky to turn the 28-point peace plan, which very much appears to have been authored by Russia, into a much more acceptable 19-point peace plan, which clearly needs to be built on. Does the Prime Minister agree with me, and again the majority of my constituents who contact me, that it's vital the UK and Europe remain absolutely steadfast in their support for Ukraine to achieve a lasting and just peace?
I do agree with him and his constituents, and we're doing everything we can to ensure that. It is remarkable that through the coalition of willing, which is mainly European countries, but not just European countries, Japan and Canada and Australia were centrally involved in our discussions over the weekend. There's been such a singular purpose in supporting Ukraine.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I appreciate that this statement might be being outpaced by events outside of this chamber. But negotiating this peace deal with Russia seems to be at odds with nearly 4 years of steadfast military support. The overriding message is that the rules-based order means nothing, that we'll acquiesce to countries that breach sovereign borders, and actions no longer have consequences. The Prime Minister may as well be waving a piece of paper at Heston Aerodrome. The message this sends to our adversaries, and specifically the message it sends to China, is that the West will be too weak to take action if China invades Taiwan. He mentioned earlier that Russia will face consequences if it invades again. So when he says a just and lasting peace, what consequences will Russia face for their current actions, or can they act with impunity?
We had a pretty good tone up until now, but I'm not here waving some piece of paper. I'm working with Ukraine to try and bring about a just and lasting peace for them. And with other countries. We all want a just and lasting peace. It's not just going to happen if we don't have negotiations. So I have to have those negotiations with clear principles about accountability and with very, very strong security guarantees. But he's really not doing this House a service to undermine a really serious effort by international partners to bring about a just and lasting peace. It's very easy to speak in this House. It's much harder in practice to negotiate an end to a conflict on just grounds. We will do so, as we've done so from beginning to end, as the last government did, in all fairness, by being clear that we are the closest ally of Ukraine, the most supportive country, and I'm very proud that that's the approach we've taken in this House.
Jonathan Brash.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister rightly said in his statement that Putin continues to seek to undermine our security. Efforts that were aided and abetted by Reform's Nathan Gill when he took Russian bribes. He is a traitor to this country. Can I ask the Prime Minister how plausible he thinks it is that that would be an isolated incident? And does he think that Reform's refusal to investigate their own party and find out how many more Putin puppets and traitors lurk there tells its own story?
The way I would put it is this: if the leadership of Reform were confident that there are no other pro-Russia activities and links in their party, they would surely want to have the investigation. The very fact that they won't look at this tells me that they're not confident of that and they don't want any of us to know about it.
Deputy Speaker, will the Prime Minister reassure my constituents in Yeovil that he will oppose any peace deal that rewards Russia for its aggression, whether that is carving up Ukraine's territory or allowing Russia to join the G7, because if Putin gets what he wants, this will never end?
Well, I can reassure his constituents that we'll absolutely fight for a just outcome and a lasting outcome, and he can tell his constituents that we're working very, very closely with the Ukrainians on this, as we've always done, supporting Ukraine for as long as they may need.
Chris Spence.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Prime Minister for his statement today and his continued leadership on a global scale, particularly in terms of Ukraine. Can I also welcome his statement with regards to the investment this government is going to put into the Global Health Fund, and I absolutely recognise the importance of tackling HIV, tackling malaria and tackling TB. But can I put a personal plea in for my Harlow constituency, Anne Strike, a Paralympian and a polio victim, to continue to lead on the world stage in the eradication of polio. We are so close, but global conflicts like Ukraine obviously meaning that we're seeing more incidents of polio in future.
He's a proud champion for Harlow, and I'm very pleased that he's raised polio in that context and linked it to his constituency, because we mustn't lose sight of the devastating impact of polio, of HIV, of AIDS and TB, and they're having a devastating effect across the globe, and they are a threat to us as well if we don't act.
Dr. Danny Chambers.
Deputy Speaker, I thank the Prime Minister for his very
confirming his commitment to the Global Fund. I actually secured a backbench business debate about that last week, so we really do appreciate that. The Army Training Regiment in Winchester trains about 20% of new recruits, puts them through the basic training, and I was actually there last week at the passing out parade. It is scheduled to close next summer in 2026, and the replacement facilities in Perborough are not due to open until 2030 at the earliest, although we've heard that's going to be delayed. Will the Prime Minister review this decision? Because a 4-year gap between one facility closing and another opening when we're rightly trying to increase troop numbers doesn't really make sense to anyone.
Can I thank him for raising that issue? And I haven't got the details to hand, but what I will do is make sure that in written form I get him a full answer in relation to the points he's raising.
Sammy Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I know that many of the Ukrainian refugees in my constituency have welcomed the continuity between the previous government and the current government and its support for Ukraine. President Zelensky is under great pressure at the moment from some within the American administration to accept an unreasonable deal. And will the Prime Minister assure us that he will give his commitment to the President of Ukraine to ensure that he does not have to give in to the unreasonable demands of land surrender, of restricting the ability to defend itself in future, and also Russia not paying for the crimes which they've committed in Ukraine. It's important for Ukraine, but it's also important to send that message out to Russia that we will not reward the aggressor.
Well, I agree with him, and I give him that reassurance, and that's why we're working as closely as we are with the Ukrainians, particularly the President, but at all levels.
Vicky Slade.
Deputy Speaker, can I refer the House Register of Interest as a host of a Ukrainian? Given the growing instability around the world, the absence of the US President at G20 and COP30, how will the Prime Minister use the close relationship between the UK and America to ensure that Trump doesn't undermine the ability of global partnerships and agencies to keep us all safe from all types of problems ahead?
Well, I'm grateful to her, and it's very important that we make the case for multilateral work across the globe, whether that's G20 or COP30, and we will constantly make that case because it's very important for a rules-based system across the world, of which the UN is one, and the principles of war are another, but it's also in our own interest as the United Kingdom.
Jim Allister.
The Prime Minister has told the House today that he and the United Kingdom will never falter in support of Ukraine. Does that mean that the United Kingdom is not part of the pressure on Ukraine to concede territory already occupied? And how could the ceding of territory be other than the rewarding of terrorism, the rewarding of aggression, and the whetting of the appetite of the aggressor?
Well, the approach we've taken is based on the principles I've set out to the House and is absolutely rooted in what the Ukrainians want out of this, and that is why we are speaking and working so extensively with them in relation to these negotiations. But all matters about the future of Ukraine have to be for Ukraine, and that is the guiding principle in everything I've been doing.
Monica Harding.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I was pleased to see Sudan was included in the G20 consensus. Could the Prime Minister lay out what that will look like in practice, as it looks like the atrocities of El Fasher are likely to be repeated in Kurdistan? What protections will be in place for the safe passage of civilians, humanitarian workers, the funding gap in assistance, and importantly, what conversations with or about states who are said to be funding the belligerents and keeping the war going, including the UAE?
Can I thank her for raising that and reassure her we're having extensive conversations with the Quad that are driving this forward on all fronts, but most immediately on the humanitarian situation, and we'll keep the House updated.
And the final question, Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I very much thank the Prime Minister for all that he does for the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, for the Western world. It is appreciated by many. There is a plan that we all hope can end the war in Ukraine to stop the devastation and the killings. Eyes are focused on the plan, and I think of the innocents killed, the women and the children targeted, and the massacres by Russians. We think of it, children as young as 8, women as old as 80, raped by Russian monsters. The massacres in Bathboot, where over 200 people were found in a mass grave. There's more than that. If you look in video, you can see pictures of Russian soldiers torturing people, murdering people. I would suggest that when it comes to accountability, there must be, whatever peace will bring, it has to ensure that Russians who have carried out terrible crimes are made accountable. So can the Prime Minister confirm that there will be retribution? As a Christian, I know there will be retribution in the next world, but what I want to see is retribution in this world for them, and then eternal damnation for the rest of their lives.
Thank him for raising that, and it may be the last question, but it's a really important one in terms of the atrocities and the impact that this has had on all Ukrainians. And I remember in the early days of the conflict seeing the images of civilians handcuffed and shot in the head, laying in the streets just outside Kyiv. It was shocking. I went to those communities when I was over there and talked to the individuals, and it was their brothers, their sisters, their families, their colleagues who had had their hands tied and been shot in the head. And it fell to those individuals to pick the bodies up, to put them in shopping trolleys, wheel them to their church, and try to give them the best burial they could in the circumstances. And we should never lose sight of the human impact that these atrocities have, not only in relation to those individuals, but on all of us, myself included.